Hello and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. Welcome to Engineering for Change, or E4C for short. Today we're very pleased to bring you the latest in E4C 2013 Webinar Series. And today's webinar was developed in collaboration with Penn State University, and our guest presenter is Khanjan Mehta. My name is Juan Lucena, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. When I'm not doing this, I work at the Colorado School of Mines, where I'm the Director of Humanitarian Engineering. I'd like to take a moment now to tell you a little bit about today's webinar, Strengthening Humanitarian Ventures Through Concurrent Research Initiatives. A comprehensive academic knowledge base supporting the design, testing, refinement, and ultimately commercialization of humanitarian technologies has been widely acknowledged as necessary to inform design decisions that ensure sustainable products for developing communities. This knowledge base is realized through concurrent research, and we invited today presenter Khanjan Mehta to discuss this topic in detail today. Thank you for joining us today. But before we get rolling, I also like to take a moment to recognize the coordinators of the E4C Webinar Series. Generally, Yana Aranda, first name pronounced Yana, of ASME, and Holly Schneider-Brown, and Victoria Chong, last name pronounced Chong, and Alex Torres of IEEE, who work on developing and delivering this webinar series. Thank you, team. If anybody out there has any question about the series, please be encouraged to contact them via email. It's visible on the slide at webinars@engineeringforchange.org. Before we hand things over to our presenter today, we thought it would be a good idea to remind you about Engineering for Change and who we are. E4C is a global community of now over 12,000, actually almost 13,000 technically minded individuals such as engineers, technologists, representatives from NGOs, and social scientists who work together to solve critical humanitarian challenges. Whether in water, energy, health, agriculture, sanitation, or other areas faced from around the world today, we invite you to join E4C by becoming a member. E4C membership provides cost-free access to a growing inventory of field-tested solutions and related information from all members of our coalition, including professional societies like EWB USA, IEEE, ASCE, SWE, and ASHRAE, plus academic supporters like MIT Lab, international development agencies like USAID and Practical Action, as well as access to a passionate, engaged community working to make people's lives better all over the world. Registration is easy and it's free. Check out our website, engineeringforchange.org, to learn more and sign up. The webinar you're participating in today is one installment of the Engineering for Change webinar series. This is free, publicly available series of online webinar showcases the best practices and thinking of leaders in the field who bring leading-edge technology and solutions to bear on global humanitarian and development challenges. Information on upcoming installments in the series, as well as archive videos of past presentations, can be found on the E4C webinar webpage listed there in the slide. E4C's next webinar series will be February 27th at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time with Mitra from Lumitor Networks on helping solve the challenge of extending electricity access to all through a metering and billing solution. Please register visiting the E4C webinars page. Now, a few housekeeping items before we get started. Let's see where everyone is from today in the chat window. So if in the chat window, please type your location. So you will see that there is a chat window. We have people from Australia. We have people from Lincoln, Nebraska, New York, Alice, Oregon, Lima, Troy, New York, and so on. Any technical questions or administrative problems should go in the chat window. So if you're having any problems with viewing the slides or sending messages or something like that, please type those in the chat window. Feel free to send a private chat to Holly or Yana. You can choose private senders. So if you have a question you don't want to share with everybody. You can also use the chat window to type any remarks you may have. Now, during the webinar, please use the Q&A window. These are two different windows located below in the chat window to type in your questions for the presenter. So do that. If you're listening to the audio broadcast and you encounter any troubles, try hitting stop and then start. If that does not work, you can use the calling number for the teleconference. You may also try opening WebEx up in a different browser. In the webinar, to request a certificate of completion showing 1 professional development hour for this session, please provide your full name and date you completed this webinar, as well as the code we will give you at the end of the session. And send these to eab-ceuadmin@IEEE.org. Okay, so now with the presenter. Today's presenter is Khanjan Mehta, who is the founding director of the Humanitarian Engineering and Social Entrepreneurship program at Penn State University. He loves connecting people, concepts, computers, and devices. A basic philosophy behind his work is the convergence of disciplines, concepts, cultures, and countries to create a freer, friendlier, fairer, and more sustainable planet. As a director of another humanitarian engineering program, I am deeply jealous that Khanjan is working at Penn State and not here with me. Pretty amazing guy. Now, in his program, students have led social ventures in Kenya, Tanzania, India, China, and other countries. These ventures range from telemedicine systems to low-cost greenhouses, windmills, solar dryers, cell phones-based social networking systems, innovative science education programs, and knowledge-sharing platforms for self-employed women. Mehta has authored over 40 humanitarian engineering-related publications with a comparable number in the pipeline. So quite an accomplished scholar. Now, Mehta, it's your turn.
Thank you very much, Juan, and thank you for that introduction, and thanks to Holly and Yana for having me here at E4C. It's really a pleasure to talk to everybody through this channel. I have about 35 minutes, and I'm going to get straight to the point. Over the next 35 minutes, I'm going to talk about the benefits and barriers to engaging in research alongside humanitarian ventures, and then I'm going to talk about diverse manuscript frameworks that can help us share our knowledge with others to build a strong and vibrant community, and a trusted community at that. So a quick introduction to HESE. We are an academic program based in the College of Engineering, but only half our students are engineering students. The other half come from every single college across campus, from liberal arts to medicine to law to human development and every other college. We offer several courses that focus on humanitarian engineering and social entrepreneurship, reflection, research dissemination, and design. But what's interesting about our courses is that the learning, the research, and the entrepreneurial engagement are very they're intertwined. And when students are in our courses, they're also engaging in original publishable research and working on these entrepreneurial ventures in East Africa or South Asia or wherever else. Convergence of concepts, disciplines, cultures, and countries, as one said, is really important to us, and at the end of the day, it's all about impact. Over the last few years, we've been working on low-cost greenhouses, solar food dehydrators, telemedicine systems, and a whole bunch of other ventures, and our focus here is on developing these technologies and working with people on the ground in the countries we work in to ultimately commercialize them so that they are sustainable and scalable. And doing that within the confines of a semester is absolutely impossible. You have to fail 10, 15, 20 times to actually succeed in some humble, modest way. And hence, all our ventures are multi-year ventures. We have student teams that work on these semester after semester after semester and advance them further. Alongside working on these ventures, students are also engaged in original publishable projects, research projects, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about why we do that over the next 10 minutes, where I have a countdown of about 12 to 13 different reasons on how that research helps us advance our ventures. Over the last 4 or 5 years, we've published about 40 papers, and we have a similar number in the pipeline. Most of these papers actually have undergraduate students as lead authors. So these are not, faculty lead author publications, but at the same time, they are going to the same journals that faculty typically and practitioners typically publish in. So research in developing communities is very chaotic. It is very dynamic. It's always changing. And it is very unfamiliar, especially to most undergraduate or even graduate students who oftentimes have never been outside the state or outside the country. And now they are in a radically different environment, working with people and then trying to conduct research, and that presents its own set of challenges. Also, the fruits of that results are often or almost always very highly context-specific. And it would be a really bad idea to take lessons learned from country A and apply them to country B. Frankly, you can't even take lessons learned from community A and apply them to community B directly. But at the same time, there is still a lot of there are a lot of things that we can learn, a lot of examples we can derive from specific instances that can help us translate our knowledge and translate it and meld it with the indigenous knowledge of the other places that we are working with. And hence, this knowledge is very valuable. So if I'm asked, what are the benefits of research? At the end of the day, one word that captures it is impact. For our program and for me personally, it really comes down to impact. And I look at this, or I even got into this much more from a practitioner's perspective than from an academic perspective. And the question was, how do we increase our impact? And impact for whom? Impact for the venture itself, for the partnering communities, for student learning, for retaining and recruiting students, for faculty, for the university and academia at large, or the profession at large. And over the next few minutes, I'm going to talk to you about some of these benefits and how that impact can actually happen. So again, the question was why. So when I started working on ventures in developing countries about 8-9 years back, most of my colleagues essentially considered this like, well, you're going to these places, you're holding hands and singing songs and painting some orphanage walls and teaching kindergarten, because that's kind of the concept that they had. And I was like, no, this is a very different form of engagement. It's actually really difficult if you're trying to design low-cost windmills that can be mass manufactured for under $500 in a radically different place with very little infrastructure. And so we said, well, how do we move from this anecdotal, feel-good perception of engineering or humanitarian engineering to move it towards a more rigorous, credible field of inquiry? And that's where, being at a Research One university, I was kind of inspired, pushed to engage more in publishing some of the work in conference proceedings and journals. So when we talk about research, in my mind, it's very clear that research equals publication. There's no point engaging in research if you're not really going to publish it and share the knowledge with others. And publication could be in many forms. It could be informal or formal. But from our perspective, it's essentially about peer-reviewed journals and conference proceedings, because that's what counts. That is what is indexed. And when people go to Google Scholar and search for affordable greenhouses, search for something else, that's where that knowledge is going to emerge, and it's going to be valid knowledge that people are going to respect. So yes, there are other forms of publishing, but for the purpose of this talk, I'm going to essentially refer to academic publishing in peer-reviewed journals and conference proceedings. So what are the benefits of research? So I have a countdown of 12 benefits. One is when we engage in participatory research with the communities we work in, we are really building trust with them, where we are telling them that, listen, we need to work on this together. We need to talk to the people, understand the various constraints and the challenges to whether it's validating the technology, field testing it, figuring out the business models, implementation strategies, how people will get access to capital, whatever the specific challenge is. But that trust is pivotal because, as you know, everything in the developing world is really based on trust. Their personal relationships, their professional relationships, and building those partnerships is going to help us go further. It helps us ask the correct questions and build the right product. And my lessons learned from all my spectacular failures over the years has been that a lot of the projects have failed because we just did not build the right product that meets the needs of the people, and we did not figure out how does it work in their larger system, their economic system, their social system, their system of incentives, the whole 9 yards. And that research helps us ask the correct questions and build the right product. When you are trying to introduce new technologies into communities, let's say you're working on low-cost solar lanterns, but most people might not know what low-cost solar lanterns are and how they can help them. So this research process incorporates that community education with champions from that community, and that's where you're actually educating your customers in the future. That's how you're developing your market, and that marketplace is then going to sustain your venture. So think about that community education, think about that participatory research as community education, as market development. From an entrepreneurial perspective, publishing, for example, the reliability of our telemedicine system was great to establish our credibility, and once we did that, there were several more partners that came to us and said, hey, this is cool. We would never believe that a telemedicine system designed for central Kenya would have a reliability quotient of 87%. And this is great. How can we partner with you? And that helped us get access to additional resources and helped us build partnerships, including with several large companies that without them, we really can't succeed. We cannot scale. So I know people hate the IRBs, the institutional review boards that give their stamp of approval on any research endeavor. And I was in that boat as well, but over the years, I've really learned to value what the IRBs bring to the table. And I actually, at the end of the day, I'm very positive about the processes in place that force us to do our due diligence and make sure we completely understand exactly what we are trying to do and how is it ethical, how is it appropriate, and so on. So I started to think about the human subjects protocols as due diligence, especially for students who've never engaged in work like this before. Of course, when you are doing the research, you're publishing, you're sharing it, you're sharing on the you're standing on the shoulders of giants, and you're kind of championing more rigorous evidence-based solutions, and there's a real need for that. And I'm going to come back to this point a little later when I talk about manuscript frameworks. The research and the publication helps to localize technologies. So just a few months back, we published a paper on low-cost greenhouses, and like within 3 months of that paper being available on IEEE Explorer, or probably less than that, we got queries from all over the place. So now we are working with a group from Ghana, from Madagascar, from a bunch of other places, and that's been great for us because that now helps us explore more markets and expand our impact further. From a student perspective, when they're working on research projects, there's a higher level of engagement because they really are forced to know every single thing that they need to know and identify what they do not know. And that process has been very helpful for us. As I said earlier, we work on multi-year projects where you have student teams working on it from semester to semester. And as the teams change, the publications then serve as valid, professionally written documents to pass the baton from team to team. And sometimes this could be moving from one team to another team. So for a couple of technologies that we have developed, we've done the core research, we've done the field testing, but we have exhausted what we can practically do with limited funding in an academic environment with mostly undergraduate students. And that's where now we're looking at passing the baton on to professionals or to other universities where you can engage grad students to develop the technology further. The research projects and the publications serve as tangible evidence on students' resumes. So most of our students, when they finish up our certificate, they have at least one publication. And there are some, like the young lady in the picture here is Rachel DeZombach, is one of my best students. And as an undergrad, or she just finished up her undergrad degree a few months back, and she has 14 publications that have either been published or are in press or under review. And she'll probably have a couple more before she starts grad school. And 15 publications as an undergrad is pretty compelling if you're trying to build your career in academia. Or even if you're trying to go into the real world and you have that PhD and you have the publications where you can get access to additional resources. Finally, from a faculty perspective, that's where you're getting academic credit and validity and respect from your peers for what you do. It's like really moving from that holding hands and singing songs to a more rigorous, valid inquiry with real impact. And that also, comes back to the theme of engaged scholarship, which is another key word that's getting pretty popular across the country, especially at land-grant universities. And finally, from a more kind of spiritual perspective, I think about this as changing the perception of engineering to a more caregiving profession. And that could be a self-actualization thing, or it could be a very practical thing, like the fact that over 50% of our students, actually it's more like 60% of our students, are actually women. And they are engaged not just because they want to go and help people, but there are many different reasons for their engagement. But it really comes back to this idea of being a caregiving profession with a real sustainable impact. So those are some of the benefits of research and publication, and I'm going to jump quickly to talk about some of the barriers. And so I've got 12 barriers that I've identified to research and publication. The first one, and the most important one, being this constant battle between the chaos of entrepreneurship and the discipline of research. And entrepreneurship is fundamentally chaotic. It's very emergent. You're trying to create a brave new world, build something new. And that goes against the grain of a disciplined, controlled environment where you might want to conduct research. And that chaos is compounded when you're working in a developing country with very limited infrastructure. Right alongside that, you have this battle of research versus social value creation. And to drive the point home, for example, we've actually done one and only one study in the slums of Kibera in Nairobi, which is one of the largest slums in Africa and in the world. And I was chatting with somebody that I've worked with for like almost 6 to 8 years, and he told me that, well, do you know what? In this slum, on any given day, there are at least 30 to 35 groups of researchers that are collecting data for their little studies. And the question is, how many of those research studies actually lead to some sort of value for the people? And I'm tempted to say that that number is probably extremely low. So as long as you're engaged in this hit-and-run research, people are going to be very skeptical of more researchers and more outsiders coming in and asking them all these questions, but they don't see the benefits. So how do we build a more organic relationship with the people where they want to share and establish that, no, at the end of the day, we are here for creating value. IRBs and getting approvals for human subjects research is a great benefit. It may force you to do the due diligence, but at least the first time you're trying to do it, it can be pretty difficult and pretty daunting. That's a challenge, but what I've learned is that if you work with folks in your IRB office, they can actually be extremely helpful champions for you. And now they've pulled up some amazing favors for us because we've sat down and had a very honest discussion about what is doable, what is not. We've talked about how several things that we actually write on the protocol are actually not practical, and here's how we are going above and beyond what the protocol says to make sure that we are doing the right thing. And we've actually co-written a paper with our IRB folks on how to go about navigating IRB issues and doing ethical research in developing country contexts. Another challenge is limited or almost non-existent graduate student funding. So you might be working on all these awesome ventures that they have an impact, but engaging grad students who can actually engage in research and get papers written up and published is very difficult. And alongside that, there's a very limited culture of undergraduate research. And that's true even at a large research university where a very small fraction of the undergrads engage in research. And even if they are engaged in some research activity, it doesn't always mean that they will get the opportunity to publish that work. And that, to me, is a huge gap. That's value that was created that is now lost. Not many, but a few faculty have expressed that, and this is not just at my universities, this is across the board, people I've talked to at several conferences who have expressed this kind of distinction between faculty scholarship and student scholarship, and my personal opinion is that that is very scary, because I would not want my students to publish in an undergraduate journal that is read by undergraduates, because I have no clue which undergraduates are going to read that paper and do something with it. So our emphasis here is on trying to get papers up to a level where they are publishable in regular conferences and journals, and not creating this distinction between students and faculty and practitioners. And how do we kind of integrate those is definitely a grand challenge that we face. Another challenge is finding appropriate forums for publishing our work. And, getting started, I thought that there were very few papers, very few forums, but I don't think so. I think there are lots of forums out there, and I'll mention some of them later. So it's a surmountable challenge. Getting papers into some of the best journals is still extremely difficult, but at least from our perspective, what's much more important is how well indexed those journals are, because at least I go and search for something only when I need it. I don't read any journals on a regular basis. I might have a quick look at some prominent journals, but I'm not reading every paper or even the abstract. So is your paper going to show up on Google Scholar or not is the big question. Another huge challenge is how do we integrate experts and integrate indigenous knowledge in our publications? And we come from a more positivistic epistemological framework, and how do we bring in diverse perspectives from the community is always a challenge, especially stuff that is not easy to validate, is not easy to triangulate. How do we bring in experts who they have very little incentive to publish, but they have been doing things on the ground forever, and they know exactly what works, what does not work, and at the least, if we can bring them in as reviewers, or mandating that every paper in this domain has at least one practitioner reviewer, that will be phenomenal to make sure that it's not just a bunch of academics, spinning theories in their little offices, and to make sure that we're always grounded. And that will also start this two-way dialogue, which I think will be very beneficial. Of course, managing the review process is always a challenge. It varies from journal to journal, conference to conference. I've had my fair share of nasty reviews. They're almost unscholarly reviews, and I've had my share of people who are extremely supportive. They understand, and they give you great feedback on how to strengthen your paper. But I've started to look at the review process as a very positive thing, actually, and honestly, because I feel that that's where somebody's taking time of their very, very busy schedule and giving me feedback to improve what I'm putting out there with my name on it. Atrocious timelines with journals, and that's a huge problem when you're involving more undergraduate students with limited time that they are here. It's a very transient workforce, and so those timelines of like 1 to 3 years really get in the way of getting papers out there. In fact, I have one paper on community health worker that's going to be published in, it's finally going to be published in, it's been in review for about 2 years. It's going to, in press for 2 years. It's going to be published in in 2 months, and I have 2 more papers that are much more deeper, specific, impactful that were done after that. But that's life, and that sucks. So those are all challenges. Some of them are surmountable, some are not. But here were two big things that we found as we started kind of engaging more students in this process alongside their ventures. And that was that, one, almost all the students and several faculty associated with our program, when you talk about research, they're essentially thinking about hypothesis-driven research, where there's a research question and you're trying to prove or disprove a hypothesis. And I found that that was a little troubling. And the other big challenge was just getting students to write, professional grade papers was extremely difficult. And so we said, okay, let's, instead of thinking about this as research, let's kind of change the question a little bit and say, okay, how do we share knowledge in scholarly communities? And towards that goal, we've developed a course, the 4-credit course on reflection and research dissemination that has 3 themes of ethical reflection, grassroots diplomacy, and research publication. And for that research publication part, we have a series of modules that range from understanding the publication process to framing manuscripts to understand the peer review process and plagiarism, authorship issues, and the whole 9 yards. And so we have these weekly workshops over the course of the semester, and at the end of this, students actually are expected to finish up their manuscripts and return them in for review and take it from there. And in that journey, something that really made the difference in terms of changing this perception of what is knowledge and how do we share it was on developing a typology of manuscript frameworks. Because there are many different ways of thinking about knowledge, there are many different kinds of animals out there, and organizing them was really helpful to our students. So in the 10 minutes that I have left, I'm going to quickly run through what some of these frameworks are. Of course, these slides will be available later, and I can point you to other resources. So it's not my intent to discuss every single typology in details. But so going through these, one, and the most common one is the hypothesis-driven manuscript, where you're trying to prove or disprove a specific statement or concept. So you could be doing an experiment to measure the luminous efficacy of each lantern in a dark setting, and then you would say, well, here's the best approach to do it, and then you're trying to prove it or disprove it. Or you have more exploratory studies which are not hypothesis-driven, and you're going out to see what do the social networks of women who engage in entrepreneurial activities look like, and what role do cell phones play in their social networks. And that's a great exploratory research study. You don't have a very specific question in mind, and you go out, you collect the data, and several themes emerge from that, which can then lead on to more specific hypothesis-driven studies or ideas for ventures, or identify the constraints on disseminating cell phone-based solutions to get market information, for example. So that would be a non-hypothesis-driven manuscript. Or you have a literature review where you've analyzed various technologies or approaches and said, well, here's where we've come and here's where we are going. And this is actually very important for say things like appropriate technology, because it means so many things, or sustainably means so many things, that, well, what does it actually practically mean, and where have we come as a community, and where are we going, and what can we learn from it, or what are the future research directions, or what do we know, what do we need to know, are the kinds of things that would emerge from such an endeavor. Or another category would be a typology or a taxonomy. I feel that these are also very important. So, for example, actually this typology of manuscript frameworks is, well, a typology. And so think about it this way. If somebody somewhere wants to introduce solar lanterns or whatever other technology in the community, and if you go online and you search, there are like 500 different designs. And there are 50 different approaches to integrating these lanterns into communities. So the question is, which one would you use in what case? And if there was some sort of a typology that differentiated these based on the source of capital funding or the sustainability mechanism, that would be very useful to academics and practitioners alike. You have theoretical models, and those are just as valid and essential. You have challenges and opportunities. These are often overlooked, but this is great if you've done a lot of on-the-field data collection. You've talked to 1,000 people and really understood all the challenges around, say, developing some sort of solution for midwives. You don't have the solution yet, but you know exactly what the problems faced with the midwives are, and putting together a paper with those diverse challenges and opportunities and painting a picture of what this context looks like would be extremely beneficial to, let's say, a class in bioengineering that is trying to design for some sort of a technology. They have no clue where to start and where to go, and they have no idea what this context looks like. So we really need more challenges and opportunities papers too. Or you've been out there, you've done something, it works, you've learned a lot of lessons. You could have a lessons learned paper and share that with the community. Or design tenets, where you've come up with a new design and then you are sharing the design process, the constraints, and how does the animal actually work. And maybe in the appendix you can add the construction manual, and that depends on what your intellectual property strategy is and whether you want to divulge every single detail about your technology or just publish the design tenets. Educational tools, you have developed some sort of a design tool to help bioengineers design technologies for community health workers. Well, that would be a great educational tool as long as you validate it and assess it and see what worked, what did not work, and what does the next generation look like. And there are several journals and conferences that are focused on the educational aspects of engineering, and they would love to have those papers. Finally, you have essays or opinion pieces. These are very useful for things that you can never or cannot easily prove or are controversial, and that's where you can add, or they're really new, and you can put them in as an essay on something that's really close to your heart. And that it's always up to the editor's discretion on whether they want to include that or not. You have case studies. These are also becoming pretty popular on websites like Engineering for Change, where somebody somewhere has identified a problem, developed a solution, they've assessed it to at least some level, and they are sharing what their lessons learned are, what worked, what did not work. So in some ways it's similar to a lessons learned paper. But these case studies, if somebody has worked on something in Zambia and I'm working in Zimbabwe, well, sure, I'm not going to directly implement it in Zimbabwe, but I'm going to take away a lot of lessons on how things worked in place X. And finally, make stuff up, and that's something I tell my students all the time is, somebody somewhere someday made stuff up. As long as you make sure that it's real, it's ethical, it's rigorous, you defend it, that's fair game. That's what we are here for, to make stuff up and make it work and have that impact. And we want to do that because we want to share this knowledge. And what happens in Mali or Zimbabwe or Zambia or wherever should not stay there. We need to share these lessons and this knowledge, because that, to me personally, is the ethical imperative. And that's what's going to help elevate our community and this notion of engaged scholarship to a higher level and ultimately expand and increase our net impact on all the stakeholders. So here are some conferences, journals. You have NCIIA, the Global Humanitarian Technology Conference, ICT for Development. On the educational side, you have ASEE. There are several journals. The Journal for Community Engagement and Scholarship has a really nice list of potential journals in this space on their website. My colleague Tom College is the editor-in-chief of the International Journal for Service Learning and Engineering, and they just put out call for proposals for a special edition on issues around how do we raise our field to a more scholarly pursuit and assessment and interdisciplinary engagement. I would strongly encourage you to go to their website, which is ijsle.org, and contribute to that special edition and look out for it. It's going to come out at the end of the year. And all those research dissemination modules that I mentioned earlier are on a Google site, accessible to everybody. It's accessible on that website over there. The manuscript frameworks that I talked about over here are explained in in significant details in a manuscript that's under review for the special edition of the IJSLE that I just mentioned. And, my experience is that with journals especially, I typically just send the abstract and a very brief, polite email to the journal editor and say, hey, this is what we are working on and we have a manuscript in this field. Is this something that you would be interested in? And more often than not, I get a very honest response back on whether or not it will fit in the next 3-4 days. And then you can say, well, is it worth investing our time, 6 months, 9 months, whatever it takes to get to the review process to go to this journal. But most journals are actually very open and they're looking forward to having more, kind of diversifying their own portfolio of publications. So I'll be very happy to engage in a discussion with anybody. Those are my particulars. Just Google me up, drop me an email. I'm very happy to chat. And I'm going to thank you all for attending. And 4409, so we have 16 minutes left for Q&A.
Okay, so hopefully everybody can hear me now. I'm going to begin moderating the questions that come in the Q&A window. And we have one from Jackie Powell, who is wondering if and how you have partnered with students and universities in the developing world to help support them and build their capacity, as well as developing a partnership for when you're not on the ground. And this is a really interesting question because sometimes our universities in the United States or in rich countries operate under different kinds of pressures and standards than the universities in the countries where we operate. So those partnerships are not trivial. They come in with complications. So we wonder, Dr. Mehta, if you have partnered with folks in developing countries in publications, and what kinds of experiences have you had?
Wow, that's a really tough question, and I think you almost answered it for me. But as you know, it's very difficult to develop such partnerships, especially with academic institutions. Their mandate is often very different than ours. Their academic structures are different, and especially when you're talking about undergraduates, it's a completely different world out there. So I would say that we have several university partnerships, but most of them are not with they don't engage undergraduate students. And they are much more focused on the projects themselves than on the research components. At the same time, there are several partnerships with nonprofits or organizations like the UN Industrial Development Office, for example, that we have a great partnership with, and we work with them very closely in our research initiatives as well.
Okay.
At the same time, we would love to engage with more universities if there is an opportunity to engage. And the challenge also here is the bureaucratic barriers. And if we can lower those barriers and really focus on the impact, if I invest 10 hours of my time on something, I'm expecting to get some impact directly from it.
Well, thank you for your answer. I have another great question from Danielle Soto, who wants to know if the publications that we create and generate and present in conferences, such as the Global Humanitarian Technology Conference, impede dissemination of information to practitioners. And this is an important question because often the conferences become extensions of our ivory towers in universities. So we end up just talking among ourselves, academics to academics, and I think the question is, okay, if we take all this energy and time to produce a publication, how can we make sure that actually gets out to practitioners, to the people in the field who might not be attending these conferences?
Right, that's a great question. And so frankly, for our conference publications, what happens at the conference is really a pretty small part of it. What we've been trying to do to get our publications and our technology in the hands of more people is take a much more proactive, hands-on approach to identifying potential partners and working with them. And in that case, it's not just a publication. We share with them a lot of the details and work with them to advance the technology further. So attending the conference is great for learning and sharing and kind of having the visibility, which practically is really important for a program as well. But from an impact perspective, I don't know how much of that really translates to the real impact on the ground. The real impact on the ground happens through the field work and having our fellows in these countries for 6 to 8 months and getting stuff done over there. Do I make sense?
Yes. Let me just add to this and invite everybody who is attending and those of you who are involved in conference organization, particularly people like Holly and Iana, to think of alternative models. 2 years ago in Bogota, Colombia, we had the Engineering for Social Justice Conference. And what we did is we created special sessions where we invited people from the communities, not academics. These are people who actually deal with the problems that we're trying to solve, water problems, pollution problems, energy problems. And we had people from the communities telling us, the academics, from their perspectives, what kinds of problems and what kinds of papers should we be thinking about. So we gave them a stage and a forum for them to be able to define the problems that we should be investigating and writing about. And it worked beautiful because it gave those people, perhaps for the first time in their lives, a voice in an academic conference defining the research topics that we should be writing about.
Right. That's a great, perspective on. And so when we are doing this participatory research, that's exactly what happens. We kind of have this community thing where people come together. We talk about the project we're working on and what are some of the questions we need to answer as a group, and then we have people from the community that actually take the lead and come with us and collect the data and engage in it like every step of the way. And they're also involved in the analysis. We often have stakeholders like the Ministry of Health that have said, well, this is good, but you really need to ask 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as well. And we then work essentially as agents for them at times because they don't always have the capacity to conduct these studies, and so we do it on their behalf. Right.
Okay, I have one more question, and it's very important, and you only touched about this briefly in your presentation, but it has to do about the sources of funding. So the question comes from Larry Bank, who wants to know, what is your experience in getting funding from agencies like NSF or NIH engaged in these kinds of research questions and activities? And he's challenging us to not to mention USAID, which of course is a logical source of funding for community development research, but to speak more about NSF and NIH.
A great question. So our ventures are supported. So first of all, we prioritize the ventures over the research, and the research is supposed to directly inform the ventures and advance them further. So our research is actually not funded at all. We get small grants here and there from local and external sources. These are like $2,000, $5,000 grants at most. We have absolutely no funding from NSF, NIH, and frankly, I don't know if they would even be interested. In the last few months, we started to look at some NSF funding sources because NSF, the way I see it, is really changing radically, and I see that it's getting much more positive, and they're getting much more interested in such issues and questions. But so far, we've had absolutely no funding from them. But frankly, am I interested in spending, say, 100 hours of my time writing up an NSF proposal or getting the papers done and advancing the stuff? I would completely work on advancing the venture. So I don't see lack of NSF funding as a barrier to my work at all. I really don't see it that way.
Okay, and let me add that to your answer that personally I have received 2 NSF grants to work on these specific areas. The first one was on humanitarian engineering ethics, and that was to research and develop a ethical framework for humanitarian engineering work. And that was a really nice grant that allows to do many things, including curriculum development and write a number of books and publications. And the other one was on engineering and social justice, trying to articulate the theoretical framework for the connection between engineering and social justice, which we believe sometimes is unfortunately missing in a lot of the development work that we do. So those are two examples of grants that we have secured, and I invite the participants to go into the NSF database where they can search for grants and look at the abstracts of this research, and they can see where the programs within NSF where they come from. So that I just wanted to add that piece.
Sure, thank you.
I have one more question here from Dan Sweezy, who says that much of the research at universities investigates complicated solutions to complicated problems, many of which would not be relevant to the developing world. Have you had success at Penn State in collaborating with other professors and research groups? And I think this question points to sometimes our colleagues who have a more traditional and conservative view of engineering tend to devalue the work that we do in engineering for development because they see it as low-tech, as not sophisticated enough, as not using all the computer and research capacity that other research ventures are. So unfortunately, our research tends to be devalued. And how do you deal with that, that tension there between the kind of work that we try to do and the kind of work that other people do that is not necessarily related to development, yet they consider it more high-tech?
Right, that's a great question. And you know, some of this also goes back to funding, because a lot of the people who do the more high-tech research often have pretty significant amounts of funding. And so if you don't have the funding and you're publishing something that is not valued as much, that can be a demotivator. But this is really a matter of kind of changing that mindset over time. And I can see that there was a lot more kind of resistance and devaluation happening 7-8 years back than there is now. And people are opening up to this idea that this is just as rigorous. So it's like every university is different, and it takes time to establish credibility and build that kind of confidence amongst your peers. So it's a journey.
Okay. Here I would like to also invite our organizers, Holly and Iana, to maybe consider for the future a webinar in inviting Leah Jamison, who's the Dean of Engineering at Purdue University, and she's the founding mother of EPICS, famous program on engineering projects in community service, because Leah Jamison, first as an engineering professor and now as a dean, had to deal with this important question of what consider, you know, the distinction between high-tech and low-tech among her faculty, and how she helps manage that distinction. So I hope that in the future we can get Leah Jamison here in a webinar. Let's see, we have about 5 minutes left. So there are many questions, and we're not going to have time for all of them. But there is one from Amy Wood who wants to know, particularly in the research and publication and collaborations that you're trying to establish with people in developing countries, how do you overcome language and cultural barriers in these collaborations?
So, I mean, I've been working in East Africa, for example, for about 8 years, and I like to believe that I understand the culture. I spend about 3 months there every year, so I can at least get by in the local language. At the same time, it's an English colony, so most people speak English, and unless you're talking to the elderly people, the language barrier is not as intense as it would be in other parts of the world. And that really helps, because if I was in a place where there was a huge language barrier, that would be the first thing it would take months or years and to get that fluency to actually understand what people are saying. And this matters because if you really can't communicate and if you can't establish trust, you're not going to get good data. So it's, again, the best answer I can give is it's difficult and you need to build that trust. So develop those partnerships, and sometimes you can get your local partner over there to collect the data, and you're kind of in the background. You're not even there in the field collecting the data because the locals are doing it, and you're partnering with them on an equal footing.
Okay. I have one question from Ana Mariela Gonzalez, who would like to know what online tools do you recommend to help structure, sketch, outline, edit, and publish engineering projects? And I guess this is a important question because the web has become a very powerful tool for dissemination, and we have the Engineering for Change website with many case studies and solutions to many of the problems, but maybe there are other online tools that we don't know about where we can outline, edit, and publish engineering projects like the ones you've been talking about?
So, I mean, that's where a core decision is whether you want to publish it to a popular site like Engineering for Change or to a more kind of academic, peer-reviewed forum. And once you've kind of made that decision on what your strategy is, I would hope that we would kind of start sharing it on one or two common platforms as opposed to having 10 different platforms to share the data. And I feel that towards that goal, I think Engineering for Change is a really great website and tool to bring a lot of these things together, because without that critical mass, that data is not going to be as useful. Or Wikipedia is another one. Apropedia is another one, which also has they have good critical mass. And then you have all the journals where you can publish things like the International Journal for Service Learning and Engineering. But I would really prefer that, or I would hope that people would kind of focus and help these websites and forums reach a critical mass, that we are talking on one platform instead of talking at 10, 15 different platforms.
Okay. I think we have time for maybe one more question, and I think this is an important question because it addresses the issue of innovation and novelty that is so prevalent right now in engineering schools. So Jevan Prasad wants to know that maybe what is taking place now in engineering for development is that we're applying existing technology to developing world problems, and these might not be viewed as being cutting edge, because basically we're doing something that has been done before, but we're just applying it in a different context. So if this is a problem, how do you address the question of novelty and innovation that sometimes is so pressing inside of colleges of engineering?
Well, so, I mean, if you're looking at it from a publication standpoint, I don't think that we are taking, well, sure, so we have been doing that, but it doesn't have to be that way. We don't have to take our solutions and put them on, try to implement them in developing countries, and actually that is very unlikely to work. So a lot of programs take a more organic approach and work with the communities and identify the constraints and design something from scratch that's going to work over there to solve the problem. And sometimes those solutions are not even technological solutions. They could be organizational solutions or business solutions. But in any case, so that is organic and that is innovative the way I see it. And I think that journals are pretty open and they value that organic process of redesigning or starting from scratch to design something for a given set of constraints. So that's on the publication side. How do you kind of convince people in the engineering schools, whether it's faculty or students, that this is innovative? Actually, that's something that's been almost a no-brainer for us. We've never run into that problem. And in fact, sure, we are all about impact and entrepreneurship, but the way we market this internally to students and faculty and deans across the colleges is we put this in this basket of, well, you want to develop your students who are confident working in multidisciplinary teams, they're globally aware and engaged, and they're innovative, then here is one approach to developing those competencies is how we've been selling it to deans. And so far, I would say that we've been pretty successful with that approach. So in terms of innovation, I think that this is much more difficult than, this is not rocket science. It's much more difficult than that. And there is an innovation component throughout, throughout the entire process and the larger ecosystem.
Okay. I think we're going to have to stop now, but before we go, I want to mention, well, first of all, I want to thank you, Dr. Mehta, for your wonderful presentation and answering the questions. And for those of you who are listening to us who have the pressure of publication and promotion and tenure, which are very real pressures for academics, I want to mention a couple of more publication outlets. There is the International Journal for Engineering, Social Justice, and Peace. I'm going to try to put these on our chat box. There is a journal on engineering studies that studies engineers and the historical, cultural, political dimensions of engineering, including engineering and development. Let's not forget our Australian colleagues from EWB Australia who have put out an amazing journal now called the Journal of Humanitarian Engineering. So that's another outlet. And there are a number of book series. The most popular one is the one led by Carolyn Bailey with Morgan and Claypool on engineers, technology, and society. And there's another one led by Gary Downey on global engineers. And again, the publisher is Morgan and Claypool. Those of you who go to ASWE, check out Morgan and Claypool and talk to Joe Claypool, and you'll find out all about these book series and your ways for you to maybe write a book there. And in terms of conference, I want to call the attention to one more conference in the UK. It's going to happen in September, and it's called Educating Engineers for Sustainable Development. So I pass now to Holly Brown, who probably wants to conclude this wonderful webinar, and I want to thank all of you for joining and listening to us.
Thank you so much, Juan. Thank you, Khanjan. This has been a wonderful webinar. Just wanted to remind everyone that they can access the recording starting next week. We put in the chat window the two addresses where you can find the webinar once it's posted next week. So we look forward to having you at our next webinar on February 27th. Thank you very much.
Thank you.